It's about that trust fund your grandfather left behind. You know, Katie's been absolutely devastated lately after a breakup, and she keeps saying she has to go to Europe to clear her head. So we decided we'll be using that money. Isn't it wonderful? My hand, which was holding a sandwich over my desk at the accounting firm, froze mid-bite. My mother had just said, without the slightest hint of guilt, that she was going to use the $25,000 trust fund my grandfather had left for me. I slowly set the sandwich down on the desk and, while forcing my voice to stay flat, asked, "What do you mean?" On the other end of the line, my mother let out a deeply exasperated sigh. "Oh, honestly, didn't I already explain? We're going to use Grandpa's inheritance, the $25,000, for Katie. To be blunt, even if you had that money, you'd just hoard it anyway. It's not like you'd ever spend it. Looking at your dull little life, it honestly worries me as your mother." Ha ha, ha ha. Her shrill, shallow laughter echoed through the phone. "Oh, and there's just one little problem," she continued, her voice suddenly edged with impatience. "We're at the bank right now, but the clerk keeps insisting that by regulation, we need confirmation from the beneficiary herself. Honestly, such a hassle. Could you just hurry up and say, I give my permission over the phone? Your father's standing right next to me. He's getting irritated." They were stuck in the bank lobby, facing their final obstacle. "Katie's trip starts the day after tomorrow. We've already put the flights and hotel on the credit card." Her words left me stunned into silence. They had already counted money I hadn't even received yet as their own, gone ahead and booked everything, planning to cover the credit card bill with it. The sheer audacity and lack of planning were so unbelievable that my anger evaporated, replaced by a dry, almost hysterical urge to laugh. Without my consent, they couldn't get a single cent. The fact that they had called me as their last resort made one thing painfully clear. All the power was in my hands. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Strangely, my mind was perfectly calm. Tightening my grip on the receiver, I asked quietly, "Why does it have to be my money? If it's for Katie, why don't you take her with your money?" There was a brief pause on the line. My mother seemed momentarily at a loss for words, but she quickly recovered, launching into a shrill, hysterical tirade. "How can you say that when you know our situation? Besides, this is for your sake, too. Helping your sister when she's depressed is the obvious duty of an older sister, isn't it?" I listened in silence as the selfish justifications poured out of the receiver. "Katie is your sister. It's for the family. You don't even have any use for that money." None of it reached me anymore. When she finally finished, I spoke in a calm but decisive voice. "All right, I understand. Everything will be resolved by tomorrow morning." "Really?" My mother's voice brightened instantly. "Oh, thank goodness. I knew you'd see the reason. I'll let the bank know right away." The call ended abruptly. My parents must have relaxed, fully convinced that I had given in to their demands, but they didn't know yet. They had no idea that when I said resolved, I meant something entirely different from what they were expecting. In truth, this situation hadn't surprised me at all. It all traced back to 3 years earlier, the day a single envelope arrived in my mailbox. The sender was Attorney Smith from the law firm that had handled all of my grandfather's assets during his lifetime. Seeing the firm's logo embossed on the heavy paper made my heart skip. It had been years since my grandfather passed away. Why now? A vague sense of dread washed over me. This couldn't possibly be good news. Frowning, I carefully opened the envelope with a paper knife. Inside was a warning, one so shocking it far exceeded anything I could have imagined, about my parents. "Dear Madison, recently, your parents visited our office to inquire about the possibility of an early withdrawal from the trust fund. While we informed them that this is not permitted under the terms of the trust, their level of interest was concerning enough that we felt it prudent to notify you." My hand trembled slightly as I held the letter. "Why?" I murmured without realizing it. I could feel the blood drain from my face. It was the sensation of something I had believed in collapsing beneath my feet. I immediately called the attorney. I needed to confirm the facts, the details, as soon as possible. After a few rings, a familiar voice came through the receiver. Calm, measured, and grave, just as I remembered. "Hello." "Sir, this is Madison Gale. I just received your letter. Could you please explain what this means?" Is it true that my parents came to your office? I could hear it myself. My voice was shaking as I fired off questions one after another. On the other end of the line, I heard Attorney Smith draw a quiet breath. Please listen carefully and try to stay calm, Madison. Your grandfather was deeply concerned about your parents' sense of money. That is precisely why he imposed extremely strict conditions on this trust fund. It was all to protect you. The words "to protect you" struck straight into my chest. Protect me? What do you mean by that? And those strict conditions? What exactly are they? After a brief pause, Attorney Smith replied in a gentle, instructive tone. Madison, forgive me for asking, but have you ever read the entire trust agreement with your own eyes? No. To be honest, I only heard a summary. I never actually read the full document. I see. Your grandfather's intentions and the fortress he built to protect you are all written there. I strongly recommend that you review it carefully yourself. The legal language may be difficult, but it contains matters that are very important for you. His words made me painfully aware of my own carelessness. Understood. I should still have it stored at home. I'll check it immediately. If there's anything you don't understand after reading it, please don't hesitate to contact me at any time. Your grandfather specifically asked that I support you whenever you might need help. Those warm words eased the tension in my chest just a little. Thank you, sir. That's very reassuring. After ending the call, I went to the study at the back of my house and took out a bundle of old documents from a locked drawer. For the first time, I carefully read through the entire trust agreement, something I had never examined seriously before. As I turned the pages, my fingers moved cautiously, as though I were unraveling a piece of history. There, laid out in unmistakable terms, were my grandfather's deep love for me and his profound distrust of my parents. The funds of this trust shall not, in principle, be withdrawn until the beneficiary, Madison Gale, reaches the age of 35. However, an exception may be made only if the beneficiary herself requires the funds for a clearly defined purpose, such as starting a business, and submits a written request bearing her own handwritten signature. Any withdrawal request made by a third party other than the beneficiary shall be deemed null and void, regardless of the reason. In the event of any attempted fraud, including the forgery of the beneficiary's signature, the bank, acting as trustee, shall have the right to immediately pursue legal action. The severity of the wording felt like an impregnable castle wall. I remember my chest tightening as I realized just how carefully my grandfather had thought things through to protect me, even after his death. The moment I read that clause, I knew it with absolute certainty. No matter how underhanded my parents might be, there was no possible way for them to take my grandfather's inheritance without my consent. That was why I had been able to stay calm during my mother's call earlier that day. Still, being calm didn't mean I felt nothing. 3 years ago, the attorney had already told them clearly that it was impossible, and yet they hadn't given up. The moment they hit the final wall at the bank, they shamelessly called me directly and demanded that I give permission. Rather than pure anger, what filled me was stunned disbelief and a bottomless sense of disappointment that people bound to me by blood could be this brazenly shameless. About an hour after my mother hung up, my smartphone lit up again with an unfamiliar number. The caller was a representative from the bank's trust department. His voice was polite, but unmistakably tense. May I speak with Miss Madison Gale? This is John from the trust department. Do you have a moment? Yes, go ahead, I replied calmly. Earlier today, we received a withdrawal request for the trust fund submitted by your mother, along with an application bearing what appears to be your signature. However, given the large amount, $25,000, bank policy requires that the beneficiary appear in person for final identity verification. We apologize for the inconvenience, but would it be possible for you to visit our branch at your convenience? I answered quietly. That won't be necessary. I could sense a flicker of confusion on the other end. Pardon me? I continued, slowly but clearly. To begin with, I have never consented to any such withdrawal. And of course, I have never signed that application. The air on the line instantly went cold. I could hear him inhale sharply. The purely administrative tone vanished from his voice, replaced by the taut professionalism of someone who had just grasped the gravity of the situation. I see. To confirm then, are you stating that the signature on the submitted document is not yours? That's correct. This is a fraudulent withdrawal request. Understood. Thank you for clearly confirming your intent. We will formally reject this application immediately. Additionally, since this involves the serious matter of signature forgery, we will report it to our legal department and take appropriate action at once. Please do, I said simply, and with that I ended the call. The document bearing my signature that my parents had submitted had at that very moment transformed into irrefutable evidence of their own crime. A few days later, I woke up a little earlier than usual and took my time brewing a careful cup of coffee. Around then, my parents and Katie were probably rushing through their final preparations for the trip to Europe. Katie might have been standing in front of the mirror, posing in a brand new dress. My mother was likely saying cheerfully, "The bank paperwork is all taken care of. Now all that's left is to enjoy ourselves." While my father nodded in satisfaction, checking their passports over and over. In their minds, the $25,000 had already slipped neatly into their pockets, shining as a future filled with luxury and promises. But the moment when that sweet illusion would be shattered into pieces was already close at hand. The day before, I had asked Attorney Smith and the bank representative to send my parents formal notifications by certified mail. One envelope was thick and bore the bank's logo. Its heading read, "Important notice regarding the final decision on the trust fund withdrawal request." Inside, in cold, impersonal language, it stated that the request had been formally denied due to my explicit refusal. The withdrawal request has been rejected by the beneficiary. No changes have been made to the trust fund. And then there was the second envelope. Heavier still, stamped with the crest of Smith Law Offices. This one would be the decisive blow. Inside were enlarged photocopies of the forged Madison Gale's signature from the application, placed alongside my genuine signature, accompanied by a summary of a handwriting analysis. And the enclosed letter stated the following. As outlined above, the act of forging the beneficiary's signature and attempting unauthorized access to trust assets may constitute the crimes of document forgery and attempted fraud under state law. Should we not receive contact from you within 7 days of receipt of this notice, we will have no choice but to consider all legal remedies available, including the filing of a criminal complaint as legal representatives of the beneficiary, Miss Madison Gale. These two letters proved, beyond any doubt, that the funding source for their poorly planned dream had been completely cut off. First, they would be forced to face the financial reality. Katie's dream trip to Europe would vanish the day before departure, along with the non-refundable cancellation fees for flights and hotels. And my parents would be confronted, in stark black and white print, with the possibility that they were not just parents who overstepped, but potential criminals who had tried to steal their daughter's money. Just as I expected, the storm hit shortly after 10 a.m. My once quiet smartphone suddenly began vibrating violently, as if screaming. The name on the screen was Katie. I simply looked at it and set the phone down on the table without answering. Seconds later, messages started popping up one after another. "Hey, Madison, what is going on? We got these weird letters from the bank and a law firm. Did you do something at the bank? Pick up the phone, Mom's panicking." As soon as Katie's frantic messages stopped, my mother started calling. The phone rang 10 times before switching to voicemail. 1 minute later, she called again. I ignored that too. After several more persistent calls, the phone finally went quiet, only to light up again with an incoming call from my father. Watching them take turns trying to reach me like a relay race was almost absurd. After a while, a notification appeared indicating I had a voicemail. Out of curiosity, I played it. The first thing I heard was my mother's hysterical, shrill scream. "Madison, what on earth did you do? What is this letter from the bank? The request has been rejected. What does that mean? Didn't you give permission? And what's this about the lawyer threatening to sue us? Are you trying to treat us like criminals? Explain yourself right now." Then came my father's voice, low and shaking with rage. "Madison, it's your father. What kind of sick joke is this? A lawyer? Criminal charges? Don't push it. Call this so-called lawyer immediately and make him withdraw this ridiculous notice. Do you hear me? This is an order. If you're really going to betray your own family..." The threat cut off mid-sentence. He had probably worked himself into such a fury that he couldn't go on. I quietly deleted the voicemail. Their voices had been soaked with panic, anger, and just a trace of fear. The fortress my grandfather had left behind was working perfectly. For the next several days, I ignored every attempt they made to contact me. Then, the day before the 7-day deadline set by the law firm, I received a call from Attorney Smith. "Madison, your parents contacted me," he said calmly. They were extremely frightened by the possibility of criminal charges. "Unfortunately, I never once heard an apology directed at you. They kept repeating things like, 'If Madison will forgive us, we'd like to resolve this quietly.' And this is just a misunderstanding between family members." The moment I heard that report, the last remaining thread inside me snapped. Quietly. Completely. Maybe I had been holding on to a faint hope that they might say even a single word acknowledging their wrongdoing. But until the very end, they thought only of their own desires and self-preservation. I took a deep breath and then spoke in a voice hardened by resolve. "Sir, I understand. This is enough. I won't press charges against them, but in exchange, I want them out of my house." I could take them to court, but for what? Punishing them mattered far less than removing them from my life completely. And quickly. That was what truly mattered for my future. On the other end of the line, Attorney Smith fell silent, clearly taken aback. "Excuse me, Madison. Did you just say your house? What exactly do you mean by that? Are your parents living in your home?" There was genuine surprise in his voice, along with the need to confirm what he'd just heard. "Yes, they are." That question opened the floodgates. I began speaking about things I had never told anyone before, things even the attorney hadn't known. My parents started living in that house 4 years ago. My father lost his home after a failed investment and came to me in tears, begging, "Madison, please help us." I paused, lowering my eyes as memories from that time surfaced. On the other end, Attorney Smith said nothing. He simply waited. I agreed on the condition that it would be temporary, just until they got back on their feet. But they never kept that promise. They stayed there rent-free, as if it were their right. I've never once heard a word of gratitude. Anger and sadness bled into my voice. Before I knew it, my house had become their house. It became so unbearable that a year ago, I ended up renting a separate apartment and moving out myself. This time, Attorney Smith spoke, his voice heavier now, fully grasping the seriousness of the situation. "So you were effectively forced out of your own home?" "Yes," I replied, nodding weakly. I had a stable position at an accounting firm and was financially secure. That made me convenient for them. Now even Katie lives there as if it's completely natural. I continued. "I've told them over and over to leave. My father always says, 'Have you forgotten how we raised you?' My mother says, 'We're going through a hard time too.' Nothing but excuses. They never listen. I'm at my limit." The last words came out almost like a sob. After I finished, Attorney Smith was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried deep sympathy and firm resolve. "I understand everything. You've endured more than enough. I will support your decision with everything I have. Based on your wishes, I will draft a formal eviction notice from our law office. With my signature, James Smith, attached, its weight will be undeniable. They won't be able to dismiss it as mere stubbornness from their daughter." "Thank you, sir," I said, my voice trembling with relief and gratitude. "How long should we give them?" he continued. "Under state law, regardless of circumstances, a minimum notice period of 30 days is required for a formal eviction. Unfortunately, shortening that legally is extremely difficult." At the attorney's calm explanation, I bit my lip for a moment. I wanted them out immediately, but the law wouldn't allow it. "Then 30 days, please, the shortest period legally possible." I answered immediately, my voice filled with resolve. "Understood. I'll prepare the notice setting the final deadline for forced eviction at 30 days from now." That evening, means certified mail, a second official letter under Attorney Smith's name, was sent to the house my parents were living in. My house. That night in my apartment, I spread out the trust fund documents my grandfather had left behind, papers I had ignored for years. Starting a business. Those words glimmered before me like a light pointing toward the future. The night the second notice arrived was hell. My smartphone had ceased to function as a communication device. Calls rang every few seconds. Notifications flooded the screen. All of them were coming from my house. My mother's sobs, my father's shouting, and Katie's shrill screams piled up one after another in my voicemail. Madison, please think about this. Are you really going to throw us out? You ungrateful child. How dare you do this to your own parents? Was ruining my Europe trip not enough? You're really going this far? You're the worst. I didn't respond to a single one. The more I listened to their selfish anger and despair, the more foolish I felt for even briefly hoping to hear a single word of gratitude, for sparing them criminal charges. Instead of being thankful for the time they'd been given, they were simply enraged that their rights had been taken away. That fact proved once and for all that they were people beyond my understanding or empathy. I blocked all incoming calls and turned off notifications in every messaging app. Before cutting off all digital ties completely, I sent one final message to a group chat they could all see. Just a single sentence. The life and assets you mocked as plain and useless were, in fact, always perfectly protected, far beyond the reach of your dirty hands. Without waiting for a reply, I quietly blocked their phone numbers and email addresses, one by one. That ended the physical connection as well. The chains that had bound me for so many years were finally, completely severed. A month later, I stood at the airport holding a one-way ticket to Denver. The $25,000 trust fund my grandfather had left me had been officially withdrawn through Attorney Smith. On the application form under Purpose of Withdrawal, I had written clearly, to establish an accounting consulting business in Denver. My new life in Denver felt like a rebirth. At the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, I opened a small office and started a business under my own name. Everything I had built over the years, my knowledge, my experience, and above all, a life free from being exploited by anyone, finally began to bear fruit. I found clients on my own, generated income through my own decisions, and built assets for my future. One day, several months later, Attorney Smith called me. He congratulated me on my fresh start, and before I even asked, he shared a few updates about my former family. Your parents were forcibly evicted by court officers. All of their furniture and belongings from your house are now being stored in a warehouse. But it seems they're already behind on the storage fees as well. He went on, having lost their home, my parents started living with Katie in a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. I was told my father's chronic back pain had worsened due to stress, and my mother, having swallowed her pride, had started working part-time at a nearby supermarket. Then I quietly asked the most important question. What happened with the bank? Before I moved to Denver, the attorney and I had spoken with the bank's legal department. The bank had made it clear that, for the sake of its duty and reputation as a trustee, it could not overlook a criminal act like signature forgery. Even without my intention to press charges, there was a strong possibility the bank would act on its own. Attorney Smith answered gravely, Yes, just as we expected, the bank filed a formal report with the police. Your parents were recently questioned on suspicion of attempted fraud and document forgery. It's unlikely they'll avoid prosecution. Hearing that, I felt no shock. It was nothing more than the consequences of their own actions. They had tried to steal assets meant for their daughter's future, without a shred of guilt. They had sat comfortably atop their daughter's kindness, exploiting her existence for years. They had planted the seeds of their own downfall. All I had done was turn off the faucet they believed would supply them forever. I didn't push them off the cliff. They simply fell, pulled down by the gravity of their own greed and arrogance, meeting the fate they had earned. At that moment, I truly understood that the trust fund my grandfather left me had never been just $25,000. It was his final message to me. Madison, you deserve to live your own life. You were not born to be someone else's sacrifice. Stand on your own feet and pursue your dreams. Now, beneath Denver's clear blue sky, I am building my life with my own hands. My small accounting firm is steadily gaining clients. On weekends, I go hiking in the mountains, and I've found time to laugh with new friends. The money I earn is no longer exploited by anyone. It is used solely to enrich my future. Choosing to value yourself is never selfish. It is, in fact, the most noble responsibility a person can have to themselves.